All right, ready to dive into EDR telemetry.
Absolutely. Always happy to talk about the foundation of modern security. It's kind of like a digital black box.
Okay, I like that analogy, but
Yeah.
why is this black box so important? I mean, we have so many security tools already.
Yeah, but it gives us the raw data. Think of it like the DNA of an attack, and that raw data is crucial for everything from understanding how an attacker got in to building those custom defenses that you need.
So we're going beyond those basic alerts and pre-built rules, the ones that often miss those more subtle threats.
Exactly. We're talking about the building blocks to truly understand and respond to attacks, not just reacting to the symptoms.
Okay, that makes sense. So for someone who's totally new to all this, what exactly ADR telemetry, what kind of information are we talking about?
Well, simply put, it's the information gathered by endpoint detection and response tools, hence the EDR, about what's happening on your computers and your servers.
Okay, and this is different from, say, logs from your antivirus software.
Oh, much more granular and comprehensive. We're talking about everything from processes being created to files being accessed, network connections, registry changes, even user activity, all captured in real time.
Wow. So if you have access to this telemetry, you can pretty much see everything that happens on a device.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like having a high-definition security camera feed for your entire digital infrastructure. That level of detail, it's invaluable for security professionals.
Okay, so now I'm really starting to see the power of all of this data. But I imagine it can be overwhelming to sift through all that information.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the EDR Telemetry Project comes in. They're doing amazing work to bring transparency to what different EDR tools actually collect.
So it's a consumer guide, but for EDR telemetry, helping organizations make informed decisions about, which tools to use.
Exactly. They analyze vendor documentation, conduct independent tests, really dig deep to see what each tool is capable of right out of the box, not just
Mhm.
with, special configurations.
Now, I'm guessing different people within a security organization would use this data in different ways. What are some of the benefits for, say, security analysts, engineers, or even CISOs?
Sure. Let's start with security analysts, the folks on the front lines of incident response. Imagine they get an alert that a system may be compromised. Well, instead of manually piecing together what happened, they can use EDR telemetry to see the whole story unfold.
So it's like having a time machine, allowing them to rewind and see exactly what the attacker did, step by step.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They can quickly pinpoint those suspicious processes, see what files were accessed, and even trace network connections to uncover the attacker's infrastructure.
That sounds incredibly powerful. What about for security engineers? How does this data help them?
For engineers, it's all about building custom defenses. They can use EDR telemetry to identify those patterns of malicious activity that might not be caught by those pre-built rules we talked about earlier.
So they can create a security posture that's tailored to their organization's specific needs and threats.
Precisely. It's like having a blueprint to build your own security system instead of relying on, a one-size-fits-all solution.
And what about for CSOs, the folks responsible for overall security strategy? How does EDR telemetry factor into their decisions?
For CSOs, it's about having the information they need to choose the right EDR product for their organization.
Hmm.
By understanding what data each tool collects, they can make an informed investment and ensure they're getting the best protection possible.
So it's not just about responding to threats, it's about proactively building a stronger security foundation based on data and insights.
Absolutely. And one crucial aspect of that is understanding where EDR telemetry might fall short, where those blind spots might exist.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the common telemetry gaps and why are they so important?
Well, one of the biggest gaps, particularly on Linux systems, is in kernel-level monitoring. This is where attackers often try to hide their activity deep within the operating system's core.
So they're going undercover or trying to blend in with those legitimate system processes.
Exactly. But if your EDR solution isn't capturing detailed telemetry at that level, you might miss these stealthy attacks. And that can have some disastrous consequences.
That sounds like a nightmare scenario.
It can be, and it really highlights why understanding telemetry gaps is just as important as understanding the capabilities themselves.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but how did the EDR Telemetry Project even get started? What prompted them to take on this massive task?
It really came from a need for transparency. There was a lot of marketing hype around EDR, but very little concrete information about what data these tools actually collected.
So they decided to cut through the noise and provide some much-needed clarity.
Exactly. They wanted to empower security professionals with the knowledge to make informed decisions, not just based on, slick sales pitches, but on hard data.
I love that.
Mhm.
Speaking of hard data, I know the project focuses on out-of-the-box telemetry. Why is that so important?
Well, because it levels the playing field. It allows for a fair comparison of what each EDR solution is capable of without requiring any special configurations or tweaking.
So it's about seeing what you get right out of the gate, the foundation upon which you can then build your security strategy.
Precisely. It's about getting the raw ingredients you need to cook up your own security recipe, so to speak.
Okay, I'm definitely starting to see the value of that approach.
Hmm.
But EDR isn't a static field, right? It's constantly evolving. Is the project keeping up with all these changes?
Absolutely. They're constantly refining their methodology, adding new integrations, expanding their scope to cover the latest EDR solutions.
So they're not just resting on their laurels, they're actively working to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. They recently launched a dedicated website, created a vibrant Discord community to foster discussion, and they're even adding more complex telemetry areas like monitoring for persistence techniques.
That's impressive. So they're not just evaluating what data is collected, but they're also looking at how that data can be used to detect specific types of attacks.
You got it. They're really taking a holistic approach, understanding that data is only as valuable as the insights you can derive from it.
Well, I'm eager to dive into those insights and see what we can learn from the EDR Telemetry Project's findings.
Let's do it.
Welcome back. So we've been talking about the EDR Telemetry Project and their work to bring transparency to this whole world of data. So let's get into the specifics. How do they actually evaluate and compare all the different EDR tools out there?
Well, what's really interesting here is they don't just give a simple, pass or fail. They have this whole weighted scoring system that takes into account the importance of each, data point.
Okay, so certain events are considered more valuable than others.
Exactly. So, knowing that a process was created, that's essential. It tells you what's running on a system. But something like a user logging off, while useful, might not be as critical for detecting certain attacks.
So by weighting different events, they can create this more nuanced and accurate picture of each EDR solution's strengths and weaknesses.
Precisely. And they're very transparent about how those weights are assigned, which is really great for, understanding their methodology. They also take into account whether an event requires, extra configuration. So you know what you get out of the box versus what needs some tweaking.
That's really helpful for making those apples-to-apples comparisons. Can you give us some real-world examples of how these scores translate into practical insights?
Absolutely. Let's say you're concerned about malicious scripts, which is, a very common tactic these days. The EDR Telemetry Project has this whole category that looks at whether a tool can actually capture the content of a script when it's run.
Why is capturing the content so important? Wouldn't
Yeah.
just knowing that a script executed be enough?
Imagine a scenario where, an attacker is using PowerShell to download malware. Well, simply knowing that PowerShell ran, that doesn't tell you much. You need to see the actual code to understand what it's doing.
It's like having the transcript of a criminal's phone call. You need the words to really understand their plan.
Exactly. And the project schools, they'll tell you which tools can actually capture that crucial information. Some might only log that, PowerShell was launched, while others will capture the entire script content, giving you much, much deeper visibility.
That's a huge difference. Are there any other examples that come to mind?
Another one is monitoring for persistence techniques, which, we touched on earlier. Let's say you're worried about attackers creating rogue scheduled tasks to maintain access. Well, the EDR Telemetry Project has a whole category dedicated to scheduled task activity.
So I can look at those scores to see which EDR products are best at detecting those sneaky, persistent threats.
Precisely. You'll see which products can detect the creation, modification, and execution of scheduled tasks, and how detailed that information is. Some might only provide basic info, while others capture the full command line, which, paints a much clearer picture.
This is all starting to feel a lot less theoretical now. It's
Yeah.
really clear how this data can be applied in the real world.
That's the whole point. The EDR Telemetry Project's scoring system provides this this framework for evaluating solutions based on actual attacker behaviors and, real security priorities.
And it's constantly evolving, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're adding new EDR solutions, refining their methodology.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges they've been tackling is addressing those telemetry gaps that we discussed earlier, especially, on those Linux systems.
Right, because as we mentioned before, Linux presents some unique challenges. It's not as standardized as Windows, so getting that consistent telemetry can be really tricky.
Exactly. And the project has done some fantastic work to expand their testing to specifically address Linux. They've built this whole new framework that takes into account, the nuances of that platform.
So they're not just trying to force-fit Windows-centric methods onto Linux. They're taking a more tailored approach.
Precisely. And what they've found is that compared to Windows, there are still significant gaps in what EDR solutions provide for Linux.
Even though Linux is becoming increasingly common in those server and cloud environments.
Yes, and that's concerning because, as their research highlights, attackers are increasingly targeting Linux with, sophisticated malware and ransomware.
So it's almost like we're in this race against time, trying to, improve our defenses as the threats evolve and the attack surface expands.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But the good news is that the EDR Telemetry Project is shining a light on these gaps and pushing those vendors to up their game.
So even though there are challenges, it sounds like they're making a real impact, driving positive change in the industry.
Absolutely. They're empowering security professionals to ask the right questions and make informed decisions about, how to protect their Linux environments.
Okay, so we've talked about the scoring system, the challenges of Linux, and the project's efforts to stay ahead of the curve. What are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should remember, as they kind of navigate this complex world of EDR telemetry?
Well, first and foremost, understand that this data is the foundation for truly effective, threat detection and response. It's not just about those alerts and shiny dashboards. It's about having the raw information you need to understand how attacks unfold and to build those proactive defenses.
It's like having that backstage pass to your system, seeing what's really going on behind the scenes.
Exactly. Second, remember that even the best EDR solutions, they have limitations. And those limitations can vary, depending on the operating system, the type of attack, and even the specific vendor you choose.
So it's about being aware of those blind spots and having a plan to address them.
Precisely. And that's where the EDR Telemetry Project's research becomes invaluable. They're doing the legwork to provide that clarity and to help you make those informed decisions.
Their work really is a game changer for the industry.
I completely agree. They're empowering security professionals to move beyond the hype and focus on what truly matters, the data itself.
Well said. And speaking of data, I'm curious to dive deeper into the EDR Telemetry Project's specific findings, especially those related to, Linux. What are some of the key gaps they've uncovered, and what are the implications for, security professionals out there?
Let's get into those details right after a quick break. We'll be back to wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating world of EDR telemetry.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basics of EDR telemetry to the EDR Telemetry Project. Now let's zoom in on those telemetry gaps on Linux systems.
Yeah, it's an area that's, often overlooked, but as Linux becomes more prominent, it's getting more and more critical.
Right. And we talked about how Linux presents these unique challenges for EDR telemetry. It's not as standardized as Windows, so getting that comprehensive visibility, well, it can be tricky.
Exactly. And one of the, biggest blind spots that they've uncovered is in kernel-level monitoring. Remember, the kernel, it's like the heart of the operating system, and attackers, they love to target it to hide their activity.
So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle's actively trying to blend in with the hay.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The problem is that a lot of EDR solutions for Linux, well, they just don't have the same depth that they have for Windows. So they might miss things like the loading of malicious kernel modules or attempts to exploit vulnerabilities in the kernel itself.
That's a pretty scary thought. The idea that an attacker could be, messing around in the core of your operating system and your security tools, they might not even notice.
It's a real concern, yeah. And it really highlights the importance of choosing an EDR solution that's specifically designed for Linux, one that has strong kernel-level monitoring capabilities.
So how can our listeners determine if their current EDR solution is up to snuff in this area? Are there, any red flags they should look for?
Well, the EDR Telemetry Project findings, they can be really helpful here. They've, tested a bunch of products and identified those that excel at this kernel-level monitoring for Linux. So you want to look for solutions that provide detailed logs of the kernel activity, including module loads, system calls, and any attempts to, modify those critical kernel structures.
So it's not just about having like an EDR agent installed, but making sure it's providing the right level of visibility at those like deepest levels of the OS.
Exactly. And it's not just about kernel-level monitoring either. Another key gap they found is in monitoring, user activity, particularly failed login attempts.
Now I'm curious about this one. Why are failed logins so important? Wouldn't successful logins be, more concerning?
See, a successful login, well, that could be legitimate. But a whole string of failed attempts, that's a major red flag. Often indicates that, someone is trying to brute force their way into a system by guessing passwords.
So it's like someone repeatedly trying all these different keys till they find the one that, unlocks the door.
Exactly. And this is, especially critical on those Linux servers, the ones that are often exposed to the internet. They're targeted by automated bots that scan for vulnerabilities. So if your EDR solution isn't capturing, that detailed telemetry on these failed logins, well, you might miss an attack in progress.
So what should we be looking for in an EDR solution to make sure it's effectively tracking those failed login attempts?
Look for solutions that capture, the username, the IP address, the timestamp for each failed attempt. That way you can investigate patterns, identify potential brute force attacks, and take steps to, proactively secure your systems.
So it's about having that detailed forensic trail, even for those events that might seem insignificant at first.
Exactly. And it highlights another key takeaway, don't underestimate the power of that raw data. It's the foundation for, understanding attacks, building defenses, and making those informed security decisions.
Well said. It's clear that the EDR Telemetry Project is playing like a vital role in advancing security, especially for those Linux environments. They're shining a light on those critical gaps and, pushing the industry to raise the bar.
Absolutely. And their work, it's a reminder that cybersecurity is a journey. The threats are constantly evolving and, well, we need to stay vigilant, informed, and, proactive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Ah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key message you want our listeners to take away?
EDR telemetry, it's not just some technical jargon, okay? It's really the lifeblood of modern security. Understanding this data, knowing its strengths and limitations, that's essential for anyone working in cybersecurity today.
Great advice. And if you're looking for like a starting point, I highly encourage you to check out the EDR Telemetry Project website. They have a ton of information,
Yeah.
detailed test results, methodology explanations, even a vibrant community where you can connect with other security professionals.
It's a fantastic resource, and it's clear they're passionate about helping everyone, understand and leverage the power of EDR telemetry.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope you found it informative and empowering. Until next time, stay curious, stay secure.